Are they discriminating against 29 recognized genders in New York by saying they will only have 50% male and 50% female? Vice Media has been embroiled in a sexism scandal for the past couple weeks now, and the latest news is that 2 of their top executives have been put on leave pending an investigation. According to CNN Money, Vice puts 2 executives on leave over harassment allegations. Vice Media announced Tuesday that a pair of top executives have been sidelined amid a sexual harassment scandal that has unsettled the Brooklyn-based upstart. In a memo to staff obtained by CNN Money, Sarah Broderick, Vice's chief financial officer and chief operating officer, said that company president Andrew Crichton and chief digital officer Mike Germano have each been put on leave, more than a week after the New York Times published a highly anticipated article that included allegations against each of them. Echoing what co-founders Shane Smith and Soroush Alvi said in response to the Times story, Broderick noted that Vice intends to achieve pay parity by the end of the year. She also said that Vice is committed to 50-50 male-female at every level across the organization by 2020, and that mandatory sexual harassment training will be announced later this week. This video is not about Vice. This video is about gender identity and parity in New York City and in the United States in general. The reason I'm bringing this up is that Vice announced, as part of the scandal, as part of the damage control they're doing, that they're going to have 50-50 male-female parity across the board at every level of their company. Now, I tweeted something out about this. New York recognizes 31 genders, not 2. So Vice is making the claim that they're going to achieve male-female parity, but I started to wonder, is that essentially discrimination? To announce that of the 31 genders recognized by New York City, you are going to highlight 2 of them and achieve them 50-50. That would, in my opinion, serve to say you will literally exclude all other genders, because if 50% are men and 50% are women, then the rest of the genders are being excluded. Now, this argument starts to become kind of like pulling hairs, but it's an argument that needs to be brought up, because there are certainly people on one side saying, yes, this is an issue. Vice, by only highlighting 2 genders, are omitting 29 as recognized by New York City, and the other side saying this is about biological sex and not about gender, and the whole gender argument becomes particularly confusing. Now, I am not making this video to condemn or condone any of New York City's laws, simply to bring up an argument that needs to be made, so let's move forward. According to the New York City Human Rights Commission, in New York City, it's illegal to discriminate on the basis of gender identity and gender expression in the workplace, in public places, and in housing. The New York City Commission on Human Rights is committed to ensuring that transgender and gender non-conforming New Yorkers are treated with dignity and respect and without threat of discrimination or harassment. Now I want to stop right there, and this exemplifies the point that I needed to bring up. It is illegal to discriminate against people based on their gender. And in this document, we can see 31 genders are listed. Bi-gendered, cross-dresser, drag king, drag queen, femme queen, female to male, FTM, gender bender, gender queer, male to female, MTF, non-op, hijra, pangender, transsexual/transsexual, trans person, woman, man, butch, two-spirit, trans, agender, third sex, gender fluid, non-binary transgender, androgen, gender gifted, gender blender, femme person of transgender experience, androgynous. Now I understand that the exact statement they said was male-female, which may be a reference to biological sex and not social construct gender. And as we can see in many of these names, the depictions listed in the Human Rights Commission, they're not talking about biological sex per se when they list gender. They're talking about sort of subcategories around a person's biological sex. However, the argument is still made that male-female essentially is a reference to gender, in which case if Vice is publicly and privately stating they're going to achieve 50-50 male-female, they are excluding the 29 other genders protected by New York City. But New York City protects more than just these 31 genders. It's not limited to them. They explicitly state that gender could be something else entirely. Gender identity, one's internal, deeply held sense of one's gender as male, female, or something else entirely. A transgender person is someone whose gender identity does not match the sex they were assigned at birth. Gender expression. External representations of gender as expressed through, for example, one's name, pronouns, clothing, haircut, behavior, voice, or body characteristics. Society identifies these as masculine and feminine, although what is considered masculine and feminine changes over time and varies by culture. Many transgender people align their gender expression with their gender identity rather than the sex they were assigned at birth. According to the document, individuals have the right to work and live free from discrimination and harassment due to their gender identity expression, use the bathroom or locker room most consistent with their gender identity and/or expression without being required to show proof of gender, be addressed with their preferred pronouns and name without being required to show proof of gender, follow dress codes and grooming standards consistent with their gender identity expression. Now, to better understand the legal obligations of businesses in New York City, we should look at the actual legal definition of gender according to the New York Human Rights Commission. The term gender shall include actual or perceived sex and shall also include a person's gender identity, self-image, appearance, behavior, or expression, whether or not that gender identity, self-image, appearance, behavior, or expression is different from that traditionally associated with the legal sex assigned to the person at birth. Important notes for this are behavior, expression, and self-image, because that is extremely broad. I did actually speak with a lawyer about this, about what it may or may not mean, and there are some things to consider, but we'll get to that in a second. Let's look at some of the requirements that businesses have in New York City. According to nyc.gov, New York City Commission on Human Rights legal enforcement guidance on discrimination on the basis of gender identity or expression. Local law number 32002, NYC admin code 810223. This document covers failing to use an individual's preferred name or pronoun, refusing to allow individuals to utilize single-sex facilities and programs consistent with their gender, stereotyping, imposing different uniforms or grooming standards based on sex or gender. And the rest is general discrimination, but let's look at some of these. New York City human rights law requires employers and covered entities to use an individual's preferred name, pronoun, and title, regardless of the individual's sex assigned at birth, anatomy, gender, medical history, appearance, or the sex indicated on the individual's identification. Most individuals and many transgender people use female or male pronouns and titles. Some transgender and gender nonconforming people prefer to use pronouns other than he, him, his, or she, her, hers, such as they, them, theirs, or sie, here. Many transgender and gender nonconforming people choose to use a different name than the one they were given at birth. All people, including employees, tenants, customers, and participants in programs, have the right to use their preferred name regardless of whether they have identification in that name or have obtained a court-ordered name change, except in very limited circumstances where certain federal, state, or local laws require otherwise. For example, purposes of employment eligibility verification with the federal government. Asking someone their preferred gender pronoun and preferred name is not a violation of the NYCHRL. It gives examples of violations: intentional or repeated refusal to use an individual's preferred name, pronoun, or title. For example, repeatedly calling a transgender woman him or Mr. after she has made clear which pronouns and title she uses. Refusal to use an individual's preferred name, pronoun, or title because they do not conform to gender stereotypes. For example, calling a woman Mr. because her appearance is aligned with traditional gender-based stereotypes of masculinity. Conditioning an individual's use of their preferred name on obtaining court-ordered name change or providing identification in that name. For example, a covered entity may not refuse to call a transgender woman her preferred name Jane because her identification says that her name is John. Requiring an individual to provide information about their medical history or proof of having undergone particular medical procedures in order to use their preferred name, pronoun, or title. Now, first, I want to say that it seems like these laws are well-intentioned, but as the saying goes, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. There are a lot of exploits that can be taken advantage of here. For instance, having any name you want certainly is ripe for protest. There does need to be protection for individuals who are transgender, but it seems like, at least in some way, this law is very broad. Now, I spoke to a lawyer about this, and I said, what if you go around claiming that your gender is an attack helicopter, and that your name is His Majesty, or that your pronouns are my liege? Well, he told me it won't pass the laugh test. You're not going to convince a business to call you Your Majesty, my liege, or any other kind of offensive term if the courts are going to laugh it out of the courtroom. The courts exist for a reason, to interpret the law. And simply because the law is broad doesn't mean you're going to get away with calling yourself something ridiculous. In a courtroom, a judge might say, I understand that the name you're using is silly, and you're trying to use this law to make a business call you something totally ridiculous, in which case they laugh you out of the courtroom. However, it does get particularly interesting if your name is offensive to some people, or if your practices are offensive to some people. Some people take offense at certain religious practices. Some people take offense at certain words. And sometimes people have names that are offensive. In some languages, certain words are offensive and they're not. In other languages, And under this law, covered entities are required to provide that accommodation regardless. So if someone has a foreign name, which is, say, fuck, then you are legally required to use that name. You can't discriminate against them. More importantly, you can say your name is fuck, and you are not required to show proof. Thus, when you go to Starbucks, a public accommodation that provides coffee to their customers, and one of the accommodations they do provide is that they yell your name for you when you order your drink to let you know that your drink is available. You could tell them your name is fuck. In which case, if they refuse to say your name or ask for proof, they are technically in violation. Now, as I mentioned, will this pass the laugh test? Perhaps for an Asian person, it will. If a Starbucks employee can say, fuck is offensive, and we will not yell that at the top of our lungs to alert you of your drink being available, is that discrimination? Well, one could argue that yelling a cuss word is offensive, but certainly in some cultures, it is not an offensive word. So would Starbucks then have the legal right to deny you? Technically, they would not, in which case you can go to a Starbucks and tell them your name is fuck. And there are penalties for refusal to abide by the law. The Commission can impose civil penalties up to $125,000 for violations and up to $250,000 for violations that are the result of willful, wanton, or malicious conduct. The amount of a civil penalty will be guided by the following factors, among others: the severity of the particular violation, the existence of previous or subsequent violations, the employer's size, considering both the total number of employees and its revenue, and the employer's actual or constructive knowledge of the NYC HRL. And so again, I spoke with a lawyer about all this, and it's interesting, and perhaps might see some argument in the future. If you go into Starbucks and say your name is stupid, idiot, poo-poo face, some kind of really ridiculous thing, or that your pronouns are my liege or his majesty, you will get laughed out of the courtroom. But a name like fuck, which could actually be of Asian heritage, that's an interesting argument to be made. And no, I didn't just choose this name arbitrarily. Fuck is an actual Chinese name. A Chinese given name, for instance, Fuck Lee, a physicist at NASA. If Fuck Lee from NASA goes to Starbucks and when they ask his name, he says fuck, if they refuse to yell his name, that would be willful discrimination, in which case they are liable for a penalty. But there's more to the conundrum dealing with human rights than just names. From almost 2 years ago, Seattle man in women's locker room cites gender rule. Seattle Parks and Recreation is facing a first-of-a-kind challenge to gender bathroom rules. A man undressed in a women's locker room, citing a new state rule that allows people to choose a bathroom based on gender identity. It was a busy time at Evans Pool around 5:30 p.m. Monday, February 8th. The pool was open for lap swim. According to Seattle Parks and Recreation, a man wearing board shorts entered the women's locker room and took off his shirt. Women alerted staff, who told the man to leave, but he said, "The law has changed and I have a right to be here." Really bizarre, Marianne Sato said. I can't imagine why they would want to do that anyway. Sato uses the locker room a few times a week, but she says this is a first for her. It's also a first for Seattle Parks and Recreation. Employees report the man made no verbal or physical attempt to identify as a woman, yet he still cited a new rule that allows bathroom choice based on gender identification. The man's protest, if that's what it was, hurts the greater cause, Shank says. As far as policy to protect everyone, Seattle Parks spokesman David Takami says they're still working on the issue. Right now, there's no specific protocol for how someone should demonstrate their gender in order to access a bathroom. Employees just rely on verbal identification or physical appearance, and this man offered neither. This didn't seem like a transgender issue to staff. Someone who was identifying as a woman, Takami wrote in a statement to King 5. We have guidelines that allow transgender individuals to use restrooms and locker rooms consistent with their gender identity. We want everyone to feel comfortable in our facilities. The news article referred to this as a potential protest, that it may have been a protest, that this man may have simply been trying to make a statement. But they don't know that. They don't know this person's intentions, in which case, simply because he didn't adhere to their preconceived notions of what someone should look like if they're transgender, or because he didn't look feminine, they're accusing him or painting this picture that this person, that she, was actually a man in protest, when in reality, it could just be a trans individual who is taking the first step in transitioning and wanting to use the women's locker room. Another issue that happened just a month ago. A new Fort Collins Fitness Center is adding a unisex locker room that was briefly billed as a space specifically for transgender members. Mistakenly marketed as a locker room for transgender members, marketing material for Alive was later changed to represent the space as gender neutral, available to everyone, said General Manager Martin Johns. We're trying to provide a club where everyone feels safe and welcome. If a transgender individual wants to work out or get healthy and alive, they wouldn't want to be singled out as transgender. I don't know a lot of people who would like to use a segregated space just for the transgender community. It's about asking for a safe space, which we all deserve whether you're disabled, a senior, or just want to feel safe. And this story brings up another issue. When a fitness center made a unisex bathroom that was specifically designed for gender nonconforming and transgender individuals, it was actually perceived as a slight. Someone who is male to female or female to male may not want to use a separate space. A male to female may want to use the women's locker room so that they can feel a part of society, in which case creating the third space was still offensive to some people. And this is the ultimate problem with a very broad law. I understand the law. I understand that people need to have their human rights protected. But what would happen if someone goes to Starbucks, say fuck Lee for instance, and they tell him, I will not yell fuck out loud? Is that discrimination? What happens if I go to Starbucks and tell them my name is fuck you? Will they not want to yell fuck you out loud? I certainly am not required to show proof of my name, and this creates an exploit where we can see people taking advantage of these laws and forcing people to act in ways that might actually be detrimental to society because these laws are too vague and too broad. I am not a legal expert, and I'm not here to say that the ramifications of these laws are going to be good or bad. I'm not here to say anything about people who are trans or people who are gender nonconforming. I understand the laws exist, and to me, it is what it is. I'm not here to stick my neck into the political debate, but I wanted to bring up something that I see as an exploit. I grew up in the hacker community. I understand social engineering, and I see these as potential ways that nasty, mean people can manipulate others using the power of the government. It's not too dissimilar from what the root of swatting is. Swatting is the weaponization of law against an individual. And now we have something it is different. I'm not trying to act like going to Starbucks and saying your name is something stupid is in any way going to get someone killed. But it's another instance where an exploit can be made using law to someone's advantage or to be disruptive, in which case, will this truly protect people, or is this only going to make the problem worse? Let's say you go to Starbucks and tell them your name is shithead, and they say, I refuse to yell shithead out loud, you can't make me do it. If that is upheld in court, if a court laughs that out and says, we're not going to make Starbucks yell that is offensive. Could someone then argue, well, because offense is subjective, I'm not going to yell out other words? Or would someone have then the right to deny a service to someone who is in fact trans? The law is particularly interesting, and I'm not a lawyer. I spoke with one lawyer about this, and it was kind of a shrug. The courts will probably do a pretty good job to protect the individuals who need to be protected and sort out those who are looking to disrupt. But keep in mind, with something as broad as this, gender being defined as self-image, there is always room for exploitation. And it's possible that someone, maybe a furry or an otherkin, will dress up like a dragon or a giraffe or some kind of animal and demand the right to work at Starbucks or any other business wearing their outfit. Because to an extent, the law does protect that. But let me know what you think in the comments below. We'll keep the conversation going. I mainly wanted to bring this up not because I'm putting my neck into the fight. I'm not here to debate if it's good or bad, just to point out some of the arguments and the exploits available. And I wanted to bring this up because Vice announced the 50-50 parity at all levels of the company. Are they discriminating against 29 recognized genders in New York by saying they will only have 50% male and 50% female? The New York City Commission on Human Rights explicitly says that male, female, or something else entirely. In which case, did Vice actually just discriminate openly against all gender non-conforming or non-binary individuals at their company? Comment below, we'll keep the conversation going. Thank you all so much for watching. If you want to follow me, I'm on Twitter at Timcast for breaking news and live streams from around the world. I just got back from Reykjavik here in New York, and it's currently a blizzard, so we'll see what happens. And if you want to support my work, you can go to timcast.com/donate. Give whatever you'd like or give nothing at all. My videos are always free and available every day at 4 p.m. And stay tuned for live streams. And also, in the description below is a link to my second channel. Go there and subscribe. It's a bit more irreverent commentary, and it will be my backup channel in case anything ever happens to this one. With that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow at 4.